eyes met across the crowded terminal, a connection that stopped time itself. Theodore Harrington stood frozen, his billion-dollar empire suddenly meaningless as he gripped the small hand of 6-year-old Leo, whose innocent fingers now linked two worlds that were never supposed to collide. Eleanor's expression shifted from joy to shock to something more complex, a mixture of fear, anger, and perhaps a flicker of what once was. The boarding gate announcements faded to silence. The bustling travelers blurred into background noise. "Mommy!" Leo called out, oblivious to the electric current running between the adults. In that singular moment, everything Theodore had built, every acquisition, every merger, every triumph in the boardroom dissolved into insignificance. The boy whose tears he'd wiped away during turbulence wasn't just any child. He was looking at his own son and the woman he'd never stopped loving. Have you ever had one chance encounter completely transform your life? That moment when everything you thought you knew about yourself, your priorities, your path, your purpose, suddenly shifts beneath your feet? For Theodore Harrington, it wasn't a business deal or market crash that altered his trajectory. It was a 6-year-old boy with familiar eyes and a missing front tooth. A child he never knew existed until fate placed them side by side at 35,000 feet. Perhaps you've never discovered a secret child on an airplane, but we've all experienced those pivotal moments when life presents an unexpected fork in the road. When comfort and certainty stand on one path, and messy, complicated love waits on the other. When we must choose between the life we've built and the life we never knew we wanted. Today's story reveals how wealth and power mean nothing when you've missed what truly matters. Theodore Harrington built an empire worth billions, but he created it at the expense of genuine human connection. His calendar was filled with meetings, not memories. His contacts list featured CEOs and investors, not friends and family. He controlled markets but couldn't control the emptiness that greeted him in expansive penthouses and private jets. The same ruthless efficiency that made him a business legend left no room for messy emotions or complicated relationships. When success is measured only in stock prices and acquisitions, what happens when you suddenly discover that your greatest achievement might be a child you never knew? How do you reconcile the man who sacrificed everything for success with the father you never planned to become? Stay with me to discover how this powerful CEO found his greatest treasure wasn't in his billion-dollar company, but in the family he never knew existed. Would Theodore choose the empire he built or the son he just discovered? Could a man who prioritized quarterly reports over human connections learn to value bedtime stories and scraped knees? The journey ahead wasn't simple. Trust once broken isn't easily repaired. A child's heart isn't won with wealth or status. And a woman who raised that child alone for 6 years doesn't easily forget the man who unknowingly left them both behind. What would it take for Theodore to prove he could be the father Leo deserved? How could he show Eleanor that he had room in his life for more than just profit margins? And most importantly, was it already too late? Welcome back to the Mr. Ross Story Trail, where every tale carries wisdom worth discovering. For those joining us for the first time, you've arrived at exactly the right moment. Today's journey explores how life's unexpected detours often lead us to our most important destinations. Before we continue this remarkable story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Why? Because each week, we share powerful narratives that not only entertain but illuminate truths about connection, purpose, and what truly matters in this complex world we navigate together. In a society obsessed with status and wealth, stories like Theodore's remind us that our legacy isn't built on what we own, but whom we love. If that's a message that resonates with you, become part of our community. Subscribe now, enable notifications, and join thousands of others seeking stories that challenge us to examine our own lives and choices. Now, let's return to that fateful moment when a delayed flight changed everything for one of America's most powerful businessmen. The sun glinted off the mirrored glass of Harrington Tower, 68 stories of architectural brilliance dominating the Manhattan skyline. Inside the penthouse office on the top floor, Theodore Harrington stood with his back to the door, gazing out at the city he seemed to own. "The sole investors are getting nervous," said Eliza Chen, his chief operating officer, the only person who dared interrupt his morning ritual. Theodore didn't turn. "Then we'll make them comfortable. Move the meeting to their territory." His voice carried the calm certainty of someone unaccustomed to hearing no. At 38, Theodore had built Harrington Innovations from a startup in his Stanford dorm room into a technology behemoth valued at $78.4 billion. His personal net worth fluctuated between $11 and $14 billion, depending on market conditions. He owned homes in 7 countries, a fleet of cars he rarely drove, and artwork he seldom admired. Forbes called him the architect of modern commerce. Fortune declared him ruthlessly brilliant. The Wall Street Journal simply stated he was the most formidable mind in business today. What none of these publications mentioned was the profound isolation that accompanied such success. "Your schedule today," announced Marina, his executive assistant, sliding a tablet across his desk. "Board meeting at 10, acquisition call at 11:30, lunch with Senator Blackwood at 1, Tokyo conference call at 3, and the charity gala at 7. Theodore nodded, barely glancing at the schedule. Every minute of his day was allocated with military precision. Productivity was his religion, efficiency his doctrine. "Cancel the gala," he said. "Have legal send the donation as planned." Marina hesitated. "It's for children's cancer research. The press expects you there. Send Reynolds. He likes these things." Theodore turned his attention to the market reports on his screen, conversation over. Behind his back, Marina exchanged knowing glances with Eliza. This was standard procedure. Theodore's avoidance of any event requiring personal connection had become legendary within the company. The business world praised his focus, but those in his inner circle witnessed the reality, a man who had forgotten how to exist outside the confines of commerce. His romantic relationships never lasted beyond a few months. Friendships were non-existent. His parents, both deceased, had stopped attempting meaningful connection years before their passing. At 11:15 that night, when most executives had long since gone home to families, Theodore remained at his desk, alone except for the cleaning staff who had learned to work silently around him. The Manhattan skyline glittered beyond his windows, millions of lights representing lives being lived while his remained suspended in the pursuit of more. "What do you mean, mechanical failure?" Theodore's voice carried the edge that made junior executives tremble. His pilot, Captain Hayes, remained calm after 15 years of service. "The primary hydraulic system is showing irregularities, Mr. Harrington. We can't safely take off until it's addressed." "How long?" "Minimum 24 hours, sir." Theodore checked his watch, a timepiece worth more than most annual salaries. The Seoul meeting couldn't wait. Too many moving pieces, too many competitors ready to step in if he showed weakness. "Book me on the next commercial flight," he instructed Marina through his earpiece. The words tasted foreign on his tongue. Commercial, like an ordinary person. "First class on United leaves in 90 minutes, she responded. "It's the only option that gets you there in time." "Fine." The single syllable carried resignation. As his driver navigated toward the main terminal, a route Theodore hadn't taken in over a decade, he couldn't shake the feeling of being knocked off balance. His world operated on certainty and control. This deviation, however minor, felt strangely significant. The universe conspires, his mother might have said, with the mystical outlook he'd always dismissed. What he couldn't know was how prophetic that thought would prove to be. The items in Theodore's carry-on cost more than what most passengers earned in a year. His briefcase, handcrafted Italian leather with platinum hardware, contained a laptop worth $15,000, custom-built with security features that would impress intelligence agencies. His watch, a limited edition timepiece with astronomical complications, could fund a college education. The cashmere sweater folded neatly in his bag required the wool from 4 mountain goats. Yet for all this opulence, Theodore's most valuable possession was intangible. Time. His time, micromanaged and allocated like a precious resource, was worth millions per hour when measured against the deals he closed, the decisions he made, the empire he continued to build. Now, surrounded by strangers in the first-class lounge, he felt oddly exposed. A woman nearby soothed a fussing toddler. An elderly couple held hands across their shared table. A young man laughed loudly into his phone about weekend plans. Theodore observed these human interactions like an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture. When was the last time he'd experienced such ordinary moments? When had he last laughed without calculation, touched another person without agenda, or simply existed without optimizing every second? His phone vibrated with market alerts. 5 new emails demanded attention. The Seoul presentation needed final review. Theodore retreated into these familiar demands, silencing the uncomfortable questions stirring at the edges of his consciousness. United Airlines Flight 8721 to San Francisco, now boarding at Gate 23B, announced the overhead speaker, pulling him back to the unfamiliar present and the journey that would change everything. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Harrington." The flight attendant's practiced smile faltered slightly as she recognized him. "It's an honor to have you with us today." Theodore nodded curtly, avoiding the curious glances from other first-class passengers. The recognition felt invasive, a reminder that he'd stepped out of his controlled environment into the public domain. The first-class cabin, while luxurious by normal standards, felt confining after years of private aviation. No dedicated staff, no conference area, no absolute privacy. Just a wider seat and the illusion of exclusivity in a metal tube shared with 200 strangers. "May I take your jacket, sir?" offered the attendant. "No." The response came too quickly, too sharply. Theodore moderated his tone. "Thank you, but I'll keep it." He settled into seat 2A, immediately establishing his territory. Briefcase positioned precisely. Water bottle aligned with the edge of the tray table. Noise-canceling headphones ready to create a bubble of isolation. His fingers moved automatically to the seat controls, adjusting to his preferred position with mathematical precision. A family with 2 small children settled into the row behind him. Theodore tensed, fingers gripping his armrests. Children were unpredictable variables in an equation he preferred to keep constant. "Pre-departure champagne, Mr. Harrington?" The attendant appeared at his elbow. Sparkling water, no ice. As the cabin filled, Theodore activated his invisible force field. Laptop open, headphones on, body language screaming "do not disturb." It was a technique perfected over years of avoiding unwanted interaction, usually effective. Not today. 20 minutes after takeoff it started, a whimper from across the aisle that quickly escalated into full-blown wailing. Theodore increased his headphone volume, focusing intently on quarterly projections that suddenly seemed to blur before his eyes. "I want my mommy!" The child's voice penetrated even his premium noise cancellation technology. Theodore glanced sideways. A boy, perhaps 6 or 7, red-faced and tearful, sat beside an elderly woman who appeared increasingly distressed by her inability to comfort him. "You said she'd be on the plane." The boy's accusation carried the pure indignation only children can master. "There was an emergency at work, sweetheart. She'll meet us in San Francisco." Theodore returned to his screen, jaw tightening. Children were emotional, illogical creatures, precisely why he avoided them. Their needs were immediate, their concerns impossible to delegate or reschedule. The crying intensified. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably. A businessman across the aisle shot an irritated look toward the boy, then caught Theodore's eye with a commiserating glance that assumed shared annoyance. Theodore surprised himself by looking away. Something about the child's distress struck a discordant note within him, not irritation, but something less familiar. Almost concern? The woman was now fumbling through her bag, producing tissues, a small stuffed animal, even candy, all rejected by the inconsolable child. "I'm sorry," she said to no one in particular, her voice carrying the exhausted embarrassment of a caretaker at the end of her resources. "He's never flown before. His mother was supposed to be with us, but there was an emergency." Theodore closed his laptop with an abrupt snap that surprised even himself. "Excuse me," he said, leaning across the aisle. The words felt foreign, unrehearsed. The grandmother looked up, startled. Hope and wariness battled in her expression. "Perhaps I can help," he offered, his voice softer than his boardroom tenor. "That's very kind, but I have a nephew about his age," Theodore lied smoothly, the fabrication sliding off his tongue with surprising ease. In truth, he had no siblings, no nephews, no extended family that maintained contact. The boy, Leo, regarded him suspiciously through tears, hiccuping slightly. Theodore knelt beside Leo's seat, putting himself at eye level with the child, a negotiation technique he'd use with stubborn board members, never with children. "My name is Nate," he said, using the diminutive no one had called him in years. "Flying can be scary, huh?" "I'm not scared," Leo protested, chin jutting defiantly. "I miss my mom." "That makes sense," Theodore nodded seriously. "My first flight without my parents was tough too." This, at least, wasn't a lie. He'd been sent to boarding school at 8, the first of many flights taken alone while his parents remained absorbed in their own pursuits. Theodore reached into his briefcase and extracted his tablet, a device that normally displayed market trends and confidential financial models. I have some games on here that might help pass the time. Would you like to try? The grandmother looked relieved but hesitant. That's very generous, Mr. Harrington. Nate Harrington. He extended his hand. Vivian Collins, she replied, her handshake firm despite her age. And this is my grandson, Leo. Recognition flickered in her eyes, the same recognition he'd seen thousands of times. But unlike most, she didn't comment on his wealth or fame. She simply studied his face with unexpected intensity before turning to her grandson. Leo, would you like to try Mr. Harrington's game? Theodore had never witnessed such an immediate transformation. Leo's tears ceased as he became engrossed in the puzzle game, his small fingers navigating the screen with surprising dexterity. You have to match the colors, Leo explained earnestly, assuming Theodore needed instruction. Then they disappear. I see, Theodore said, finding himself genuinely interested in the child's methodology. You're starting from the corners. That's strategic. Leo beamed at the praise. Mom says I'm good at puzzles. 20 minutes later, Theodore found himself seated beside Leo, his expensive suit jacket removed, sleeves rolled up, fully invested in helping the boy advance through increasingly difficult levels. The sensation was entirely unfamiliar, this focus on something with no profit margin, no strategic advantage, no quantifiable return on investment, just the simple pleasure of a child's delight and the surprising satisfaction of being useful in a way that had nothing to do with his empire. You're really smart, Theodore observed as Leo solved a particularly challenging level. Mom says I get it from my dad, Leo said casually, eyes still on the screen. But I've never met him. Something about this statement sent an unexpected chill through Theodore. Your dad? He's really busy and important, Leo continued, his focus unwavering from the game. Mom keeps his picture by her bed. She thinks I don't know, but I've seen her looking at it when she's sad. Vivian Collins shifted uncomfortably beside them. Leo, perhaps Mr. Harrington needs to return to his work. It's fine, Theodore assured her, surprising himself with the sincerity of his response. I'm enjoying the company. As the flight continued, Leo gradually shared more about his life, comfortable with Theodore in the uncomplicated way children often are with adults who take them seriously. We're moving to San Francisco, Leo explained, now sharing Theodore's in-flight lunch, having declared his own chicken nuggets weird tasting. That's a big change, Theodore replied. Have you been there before? Leo shook his head. Mom got a new job. She makes buildings. Makes buildings? She draws them first, Leo clarified, hands gesturing expressively. Then other people build them. Really tall ones with special windows. An architect, Theodore supplied, something tugging at his memory. That's the word. Leo's face lit up. She's the best one ever. Architect. San Francisco. A bright-eyed boy approximately 6 years old. Theodore's analytical mind, the same mind that identified market patterns and predicted industry shifts, began assembling these fragments into a hypothesis he wasn't prepared to examine. Your mother sounds talented, he said carefully. She is. Want to see? Leo rummaged through his backpack, producing a slightly crumpled drawing. She made this for me. It's where we're going to live someday. The sketch showed a modern building with flowing lines and distinctive angular windows, a style Theodore recognized immediately. His pulse quickened. Leo, he asked, keeping his voice casual, what's your mom's name? Eleanor, the boy answered, returning to the tablet game. Eleanor Valencia. The name hit Theodore with physical force, 5 years ago, Barcelona. The talented architect he'd hired for the European headquarters. The woman he'd fallen for during those summer months. The relationship he'd ended when Tokyo called with a better opportunity. Vivian Collins was watching him closely, her expression guarded. She knew. Somehow, she knew exactly who he was. Mr. Harrington, she said quietly, perhaps we could speak privately when Leo takes his nap. Theodore nodded, his world tilting on its axis as he calculated dates and timelines with the precision that had built his fortune. Leo would be turning 7 soon. 7 years minus 9 months would place conception exactly during those Barcelona months with Eleanor. The boy who'd been crying for his mother, the boy whose tears he dried, the boy now leaning trustingly against his arm as he played ... was his son. Mom designed that one, Leo said, pointing to a skyscraper visible on Theodore's tablet background, the Harrington Innovation Center in Chicago. Theodore felt his throat tighten. Your mother worked on that building? She showed me pictures. She said it was special because... Leo scrunched his face in concentration. Because the curves matched the lake waves. That detail hadn't been in any press release. It was a private conversation he'd had with Eleanor late one night in Barcelona, her head resting on his chest as they discussed the conceptual design. She'd whispered that inspiration while tracing patterns on his skin. Your mother sounds very talented, Theodore managed. She makes buildings that don't fall down in earthquakes, Leo continued proudly. She's designing a museum now, with dinosaurs. Each casual comment from Leo added another piece to a puzzle Theodore was increasingly afraid to complete. The timing aligned perfectly. Their relationship had ended 5 years and 9 months ago. Leo appeared to be 6, perhaps approaching 7. Leo, may I ask when your birthday is? Theodore kept his tone conversational. October 12th, Leo answered immediately. I'll be 7. Mom says we can have a party at the Science Museum this year. October 12th. Theodore's mind raced through calendar calculations. Their final night together had been in early January, almost exactly 9 months prior. Vivian Collins cleared her throat softly. Leo, why don't you watch your movie for a while? I think Mr. Harrington might like some quiet time, but Theodore found himself unwilling to end the interaction. Actually, I'm enjoying our conversation. As Leo returned to his game, Theodore studied him with new awareness. The boy's focused concentration, a slight furrow between his eyebrows as he tackled complex puzzles. Theodore recognized these expressions from his own reflection. Leo's hands moved with the same methodical precision that Theodore's did when analyzing spreadsheets. His questions were direct, logical, seeking efficient solutions rather than emotional reassurance, a trait Theodore's own mother had often commented on. You always want the straightest line between 2 points, she'd said. Even as a toddler, when Leo laughed at a character's mishap in the game, Theodore noticed the dimple that appeared on his left cheek, identical to his own rarely seen smile. Does your mom tell you that you look like your dad? Theodore asked carefully. Leo shrugged. Sometimes she says I have his thinking face. Thinking face? Leo demonstrated, furrowing his brow and tilting his head slightly, a perfect miniature version of Theodore's own expression when solving complex problems. The flight attendant approached with beverage service, momentarily breaking the moment. She glanced between them, then commented, Your son has your eyes, sir. He's not. Theodore began automatically, then stopped. Thank you, he said instead, watching Leo's pleased reaction to being mistaken as his child. The simplicity of that exchange, a stranger's casual observation, landed with unexpected force. Theodore had built global headquarters, launched revolutionary products, and transformed entire industries, yet he'd never experienced this most fundamental human connection, fatherhood. As Leo dozed off against his grandmother's shoulder, Theodore's mind traveled back 5 years to Barcelona, the unexpected detour in his meticulously planned life. He'd hired Eleanor Valencia on reputation alone. Her innovative approach to sustainable architecture aligned perfectly with Harrington Innovation's European expansion. Their first meeting was supposed to be a standard project discussion. Instead, he'd encountered a woman who challenged every assumption, questioned his vision, and demanded substance beyond style. In the conference room overlooking Barcelona's Gothic quarter, she'd pushed back against his efficiency-focused design. Buildings aren't just productivity machines, she'd argued. They're living environments that shape human experience. Her passion had been disarming. For the first time in years, Theodore found himself adapting his vision to accommodate someone else's perspective. The project meetings became dinners. Professional discussions evolved into personal revelations. Walks through Barcelona to discuss architectural inspiration transformed into hand-holding explorations of hidden plazas and moonlit beaches. For 3 months, Theodore delayed his return to New York. Board members questioned the extended European stay. His executive team grew restless, but in Eleanor's company, Theodore discovered a version of himself he barely recognized, a man who laughed freely, who sometimes left his phone behind, who found beauty in moments not measured by profit margins. Then came Tokyo, the expansion opportunity his company couldn't ignore, the choice between professional advancement and personal connection. We could make it work, Eleanor had suggested, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. Long distance isn't impossible. My life doesn't have room for distractions, he'd responded, immediately regretting the word choice. Distractions, she'd repeated quietly. Is that what this has been? He'd left for Tokyo the next morning, convincing himself their connection had been temporary, a pleasant diversion, nothing more. Now, looking at Leo's sleeping form, Theodore confronted the magnitude of what he'd dismissed so easily. When Leo woke from his nap, Vivian excused herself to the restroom, giving Theodore the opening he'd been waiting for. Leo, you mentioned your birthday is October 12th, he began carefully. Were you born in San Francisco? No, Barcelona, Leo replied, stretching. But I don't remember it. We moved when I was a baby. Barcelona. The final confirmation Theodore needed. Your mother, he continued, heart racing. Does she talk about Barcelona? Leo shrugged. Sometimes. She says that's where she fell in love with my dad. The simple statement, delivered with a child's directness, struck Theodore with physical force. Has your mother ever shown you pictures of your father? He asked, struggling to maintain his composure. Just one. She keeps it in her special box. Leo looked up, studying Theodore's face with sudden intensity. You kind of look like him. The observation hung between them, innocent yet profound. Vivian returned, her expression shifting as she assessed the situation. Leo, would you like to walk down the aisle with me? We should stretch our legs before landing. As they rose, Vivian leaned close to Theodore. After he's asleep tonight, we should talk. This isn't how Eleanor planned for things to happen. Theodore nodded, unable to form words as his world realigned around this new reality. He was a father. The aircraft began its descent into San Francisco, the captain's announcement cutting through Theodore's thoughts. In 30 minutes, the plane would land. In 30 minutes, he would come face to face with Eleanor Valencia and the life he never knew he had. What would he say? How could he explain that he discovered their son by pure coincidence? More importantly, did he have any right to disrupt the life they'd built without him? The businessman who controlled global markets with confidence now faced the most important negotiation of his life, with absolutely no leverage, no preparation, and everything to lose. If you're captivated by Theodore's journey so far, this is just the beginning of a story that challenges our understanding of success, second chances, and what truly matters in life. Hit the subscribe button right now to ensure you don't miss what happens when Theodore comes face to face with Eleanor and the truth she's kept hidden for nearly 7 years. Will she welcome him into their lives? Can a man who prioritized profit over people transform into the father Leo deserves? The answers await in the next part of this extraordinary journey. Subscribe now, and let's continue this path together. Leo, would you like to watch a movie? Vivian suggested, handing her grandson headphones. I think Mr. Harrington and I should chat. Once Leo was absorbed in his film, Vivian moved to the empty seat beside Theodore, her expression grave. I assume you figured it out, she began without preamble. Theodore nodded, his voice low. He's my son. Yes. The single syllable carried weight, an undeniable truth that altered everything. Why didn't you tell me? The question emerged more vulnerable than Theodore intended, his customary control slipping. Vivian studied him, her assessment both maternal and piercing. She tried, Mr. Harrington. For weeks after you left Barcelona. That's not possible. I would have known if... Would you? Vivian challenged. You were in Tokyo, as I understand it, securing the deal that added several billion to your company's value. The precise reference to his business dealings confirmed Eleanor had shared details of their relationship with her mother. Theodore felt oddly exposed. Your assistant, Zara, I believe, informed Eleanor that you were unavailable indefinitely and would not be taking personal calls, Vivian continued. After the 5th attempt, Eleanor made her decision. She would raise her child without forcing herself into your carefully structured life. Theodore recalled those weeks in Tokyo, his explicit instructions to shield him from distractions during negotiations. The barrier he'd created had worked precisely as designed, protecting him from interruptions, including the news of his own child. I had no idea, he said, the defense sounding hollow even to himself. Would it have mattered? Vivian asked, not unkindly. If you had known, would you have made different choices? The question struck with surgical precision, forcing Theodore to confront an uncomfortable truth. 6 years ago, he likely would have seen a child as a complication to be managed rather than a gift to be embraced. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant 2 weeks after you left, Vivian explained, her voice softening slightly. She was designing your European headquarters by day and battling morning sickness by night. Each detail landed like an accusation, though Vivian's tone remained factual rather than judgmental. She called your office first. When that failed, she tried your personal number, disconnected. Then your email, automated responses. Finally, she contacted your company's HR department, who informed her that all communications for you were being screened during the Tokyo negotiations. Theodore remembered the protocol, his standard operating procedure during major deals. Complete isolation from outside influence to maintain focus, a strategy that had served his business interests perfectly while catastrophically failing his personal life. After learning she was pregnant, why did she stay in Barcelona? Why not return to the States? Theodore asked. She had a 3-year contract with a Spanish firm. The prenatal care was excellent, and she had colleagues who became supportive friends. Vivian's expression softened with memory. I joined her for the last trimester in Leo's birth. October 12th, Theodore murmured. Yes, 7 pounds 9 ounces. Your eyes, your chin, your analytical nature evident from his earliest days. Vivian's gaze held no accusation, only the steady assessment of a grandmother who had witnessed everything he had missed. By the time Leo was 6 months old, Eleanor had decided to return to America. She settled in Chicago initially. The timing aligned with a period when Theodore had frequently visited his Chicago headquarters. They might have passed on the street, Eleanor pushing a stroller containing his infant son while he hurried between meetings, oblivious. When Leo was 2, Eleanor was offered a position with an architectural firm in Seattle. 3 years later, this opportunity in San Francisco. She's built a good life for them, Mr. Harrington. The unspoken question hung between them. What right did he have to disrupt it? May I ask a personal question? Theodore said, his voice barely audible above the plane's engines. Vivian nodded, her expression guarded but not unkind. What has she told Leo about me? Only positive things, Vivian replied. That his father is successful and intelligent, that he has your eyes and your mind. She's never spoken negatively about you in Leo's presence. But he doesn't know who I am. He knows his father is someone important who couldn't be with him. Eleanor felt that was better than telling him his father chose not to be part of his life. The distinction cut deep, the difference between couldn't and wouldn't. One implied circumstance, the other, choice. She protected my reputation with my own son, Theodore realized aloud. She protected Leo, Vivian corrected gently. Children shouldn't bear the weight of adult decisions. Theodore fell silent, processing the magnitude of what he'd missed. First steps, first words, first days of school. Birthdays, Christmases, ordinary Tuesdays. The everyday miracles of watching his son grow. While he'd been building an empire, Eleanor had been building a human being. Their son. That depends entirely on you, Mr. Harrington. Vivian's voice carried the wisdom of a mother who had seen both triumph and heartbreak. Eleanor has managed alone for nearly 7 years. She'll continue doing so if necessary. The question is what role you want in your son's life, and whether you're prepared for what that truly means. When Leo removed his headphones, movie finished, he turned to Theodore with a direct gaze that now registered as genetically familiar. Want to see my rocks? He asked, pulling a small pouch from his backpack. Theodore nodded, grateful for the simple interaction while his mind continued processing Vivian's revelations. Leo emptied his collection onto the tray table, an assortment of stones ranging from ordinary pebbles to semi-precious specimens. This one's quartz, Leo explained, holding up a crystal. And this one has fossils. Mom says it's millions of years old. May I? Theodore asked, reaching for the fossil. Leo placed it carefully in his palm. You have to be gentle. It's irreplaceable. Theodore examined the stone, noting the delicate impressions of ancient life preserved in solid rock. Do you know what kind of fossil this is? Ammonite, Leo answered promptly. They lived in the ocean a really long time ago. You know a lot about rocks. Leo beamed at the praise. Mom gets me books from the library. I'm going to be a geologist when I grow up. Or maybe an architect like Mom. Or maybe both. As Leo continued cataloging his collection, Theodore observed him with new awareness. This small person who carried his DNA, his mannerisms, perhaps even his aptitudes, yet had been shaped entirely without his influence. This one changes color in different light, Leo demonstrated, tilting a Labradorite specimen. It's beautiful, Theodore said, genuinely impressed by both the stone and his son's knowledge. You can hold it if you want, Leo offered, extending the prize of his collection with simple trust. The gesture, small yet profound in its innocent generosity, struck Theodore with unexpected force. This child, who had no idea of their connection, was freely sharing his treasures. Meanwhile, Theodore had been absent for 6 years, contributing nothing to the remarkable person forming before him. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into San Francisco International Airport. Please return to your seats, fasten your seatbelts, and prepare for landing. The captain's announcement cut through Theodore's thoughts like a clock striking midnight. Their borrowed time was ending. Soon the plane would land, and he would face Eleanor Valencia, the woman he'd left behind, the mother of his child. We'd better put your rocks away, Theodore suggested, helping Leo gather his collection. Are you staying in San Francisco? Leo asked, tucking the pouch into his backpack. I wasn't planning to, Theodore admitted, but plans change. Leo fastened his seatbelt, then turned to Theodore with unexpected seriousness. My mom says that sometimes the best things happen when plans change. The wisdom, delivered with a child's simplicity, struck Theodore as profoundly true. His entire career had been built on rigid planning, controlled outcomes, anticipated responses, yet his most meaningful relationship with Eleanor had been unplanned. And now, his most important discovery, this child, had come through complete coincidence. Your mother is very wise, he replied. As the plane descended through clouds, San Francisco Bay emerging below them, Theodore felt a growing urgency. In 20 minutes, they would land. In 30, they would enter the terminal. Perhaps within the hour, he would stand face to face with Eleanor Valencia for the first time in nearly 7 years. What would he say? What could he possibly offer after so much absence? And most importantly, would she allow him any place in their lives? The businessman who controlled global markets with confidence now faced the most important conversation of his life with absolutely no preparation, no strategy, and everything at stake. The fastened seatbelt sign illuminated. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan. Time was running out. The plane descended through cloud cover, revealing San Francisco Bay shimmering below. Theodore's stomach tightened, not from turbulence, but from the imminent collision of past and present awaiting him at the gate. We're almost there. Leo pressed his face against the window, previous tears forgotten in his excitement. Vivian Collins glanced at Theodore, her expression a complex mixture of concern and resignation. She doesn't know, she said quietly while Leo remained distracted. About meeting you on the plane. Theodore nodded, his usual commanding presence diminished by uncertainty. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he had no strategy, no prepared statement, no negotiation tactics to deploy. What should I? He began. Just be gentle, Vivian interrupted. She's carried this alone for a long time. The captain announced their final approach. Passengers gathered belongings, flight attendants made final checks, and the ordinary rhythms of air travel continued around Theodore while his world tilted on its axis. Such a simple request, so ordinary between father and son, yet it struck Theodore with unexpected force. This was his child asking for help, his son. As the wheels touched down on California soil, Theodore Harrington, master of global markets, found himself utterly unprepared for the most important meeting of his life. The jetway stretched before them like a threshold between worlds. Theodore hung back, allowing several passengers to move ahead while Leo bounced impatiently beside his grandmother. Mom said she'd be right at the gate, Leo announced, craning his neck to see past the crowd. Theodore adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture he hadn't indulged in years. His usual confident stride had abandoned him, replaced by measured steps and racing thoughts. What right did he have to disrupt their lives? What possible explanation could justify his sudden appearance? Most importantly, what did he actually want from this encounter? The terminal approached with each step, bright lights revealing the waiting crowd beyond. Families greeted returning travelers, business associates held signs, and somewhere among them stood Eleanor Valencia, the woman he'd once dismissed as incompatible with his ambitions. Mr. Harrington? Vivian's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Would you prefer to go ahead? We can follow separately if that would be easier. The offer provided a graceful exit, a way to avoid the imminent collision. He could walk past Eleanor without recognition, return to his empire, pretend this day had never happened. For a moment, Theodore considered it. Then Leo grabbed his hand. Come on, Mom's waiting. The boy tugged him forward, unaware of the complex history he was literally pulling together. Theodore looked down at their joined hands, his large one engulfing Leo's small fingers, and made his choice. We'll go together, he told Vivian, his voice steadier than he felt. There she is. Leo's excited shout cut through the terminal noise. He dropped Theodore's hand, running forward through the crowd. Theodore followed Leo's path with his eyes until he saw her. Eleanor Valencia stood near a support column, scanning the deplaning passengers. Her dark hair fell shorter now than he remembered, framing a face that had matured but remained achingly familiar. She wore simple jeans and a blue blouse rather than the professional attire he associated with her. Yet she commanded the space around her with the same quiet confidence that had first drawn him to her in Barcelona. She hadn't noticed him yet, her attention fixed on the stream of arriving passengers. Then Leo's voice rang out, "Mommy!" and her expression transformed with pure joy. She knelt, arms opening as Leo crashed into her embrace. Theodore stopped walking, frozen in place as he watched their reunion, this intimate moment between mother and son that highlighted all he had missed. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, holding Leo tight, murmuring words Theodore couldn't hear. Then she looked up, scanning for her mother, and instead found Theodore Harrington standing 10 feet away, watching them. The transformation in her expression would haunt him for years to come, joy collapsing into shock, shock hardening into something between fear and anger. Her arms tightened protectively around Leo as she slowly rose to her feet. Time suspended between them, 5 years compressed into a single electric moment of recognition. "Mommy, I made a friend on the plane." Leo's voice shattered the frozen moment, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. "He knows games and he knows your name." Eleanor's gaze never left Theodore's face as she responded to her son. "I see that, sweetheart." Vivian approached, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "The flight was delayed," she explained quietly. "Mr. Harrington was seated across from us." "Mr. Harrington," Eleanor repeated, her voice controlled despite the visible tremor in her hands. What an unexpected coincidence. Theodore recognized her architect's voice, the professional tone she'd used in their early meetings before Barcelona's warmth had melted the boundaries between them. "Eleanor," he responded, her name feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. "It's been a long time. 5 years, 7 months," she specified with precision that confirmed she'd counted. Leo looked between them, confusion clouding his expression. "You know each other?" Eleanor knelt again, meeting her son's eyes. "Mr. Harrington and I worked together a long time ago, before you were born." "On buildings?" Leo asked. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice softening. "On buildings?" Theodore watched their interaction with an ache spreading through his chest. This easy communication between mother and son, the shared language of their family unit, a bond formed without him. "Leo, why don't we get the luggage?" Vivian suggested, recognizing the need for adult conversation. "I think I saw a pretzel stand near baggage claim." Leo hesitated, looking at Theodore. "Are you leaving?" The simple question carried weight far beyond a child's curiosity. Theodore glanced at Eleanor, whose expression remained guarded. "I think your mom and I need to talk," he answered carefully. "Okay." Leo accepted this with a child's easy trust. "Will I see you again?" Before Theodore could respond, Eleanor interjected. "Leo, go with Grandma. I'll join you in a few minutes." Once Leo and Vivian disappeared into the crowd, the carefully maintained composure in Eleanor's expression faltered. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, voice low but intense. "My private jet had mechanical issues. I took a commercial flight." The explanation sounded hollow even to his ears. "I had no idea." "That you had a son," Eleanor finished, crossing her arms, "or that we'd be on your flight." "Either," Theodore admitted. "Both." Travelers moved around them, oblivious to the life-altering conversation unfolding in their midst. A child squealed with delight nearby. Airport announcements echoed overhead, yet between Eleanor and Theodore existed a bubble of charged silence. "He looks like you," Eleanor finally said. "Everyone always comments on it. Why didn't you tell me?" The question emerged more accusatory than intended. Her laugh held no humor. "You made your priorities very clear in Barcelona, Nate. Your company would always come first. You were pregnant when I left. I found out 2 weeks later." Her gaze was steady, challenging. "I called your office repeatedly." Theodore remembered those weeks in Tokyo. The deal that had expanded Harrington Innovations into Asian markets, the instructions to his assistant to block all non-essential communications. "We need to talk," he said. "Properly." Eleanor glanced toward baggage claim where Leo waited. "Not here. Not now. When?" "Tonight," she conceded. "After Leo's asleep." She wrote an address on a business card and handed it to him. 9 o'clock. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, the first physical contact in nearly 7 years, sending an unexpected current through Theodore's carefully constructed defenses. "I'll be there," he promised. Eleanor nodded once, then walked away, shoulders straight, head high, the same dignified exit she'd made from his life in Barcelona. Except this time, Theodore watched her go with the knowledge that everything had changed. Theodore stood outside Eleanor's apartment at precisely 9 o'clock, his usual punctuality a hollow comfort in the face of such monumental uncertainty. The modest building in San Francisco's Mission District stood worlds apart from his luxury penthouse, a physical manifestation of their divergent paths. He knocked, 3 measured taps against wood. The door opened to reveal Eleanor Valencia, changed from her airport attire into simple jeans and a gray sweater. Without heels, she seemed smaller than he remembered, yet her presence filled the doorway with undeniable strength. "You came," she observed, neither welcoming nor rejecting. "I said I would." She stepped aside, allowing him entry into the space she shared with their son. The apartment was warm and lived in. Architectural magazines stacked beside children's books, a half-completed Lego structure on the coffee table, framed drawings that could only be Leo's adorning the walls. "Leo's asleep?" Theodore asked, noting the quiet. "Yes, he was exhausted from the flight." Eleanor gestured toward a small kitchen table, rather than the more intimate living room sofa. "Would you like coffee?" "Please." The domestic routine, coffee cups, spoons, cream, created a false sense of normalcy between them. Eleanor's movements were efficient, precise, the same attention to detail she'd applied to architectural renderings now evident in this simple task. When she finally sat across from him, coffee served but untouched between them, the careful neutrality in her expression cracked slightly. "I never expected this day to come," she admitted. "Finding you on our flight feels like some cosmic joke. Or fate," Theodore suggested. "Fate," she repeated the word without warmth. "Is that what you call it?" "I need to understand," Theodore began, choosing his words carefully. "Vivian said you tried to reach me after Barcelona. 15 calls to your office, 8 emails, 3 messages with your executive assistant." Eleanor's recall of the exact numbers revealed how deeply those attempts had marked her. "After 3 weeks of silence, I received the message clearly enough." "Zara was following my instructions," Theodore explained, "during the Tokyo negotiations." "I know all about the Tokyo negotiations," Eleanor interrupted. "How Harrington Innovations expanded into Asian markets, how you personally secured exclusivity agreements with 3 major manufacturers, how your company's value increased 46% that quarter." Her precision felt like accusation. Business journals covered it extensively. "You followed my career," Theodore observed. "I researched the father of my child," she corrected. "I wanted to understand the man who would remain a shadow in Leo's life." Theodore absorbed this, recognizing the distinction. "If I had known about the pregnancy—" "What?" Eleanor challenged, leaning forward. "What would you have done differently? Transferred money monthly? Visited on designated holidays? Added father to your LinkedIn profile?" The bitterness in her voice revealed years of carefully contained anger. Theodore recognized it wasn't just about his absence. It was about the fundamental choices that had defined his character. "I don't know what I would have done," he admitted, the honesty costing him. "But I deserve the chance to make that choice, and I deserve more than being classified as a distraction from your real priorities." Eleanor's composure slipped momentarily, revealing the wound his parting words had left. "Those were your exact words, Nate. My life doesn't have room for distractions." "Do you want to know what it was like?" Eleanor asked, her voice steadier now. "Finding out I was pregnant after the man I loved made it clear his career would always come first?" Theodore nodded, though part of him feared the answer. "I was designing your European headquarters. Ironic, isn't it? While vomiting every morning from pregnancy sickness, I'd check my phone between meetings, hoping you'd responded to my messages. I'd wake up at night calculating time zones, wondering if now might be a good time to try reaching you again." She took a sip of coffee, organizing her thoughts. By my second trimester, I'd stopped trying. I focused instead on creating a life where my child wouldn't feel the absence of someone who chose not to be present. I finished your building design. It won an award, by the way. I continued my contract in Barcelona. I prepared for single motherhood. Her gaze held his unwavering. When Leo was born, he had your eyes, your chin, even your furrowed brow when something confused him. The delivery nurse commented on how alert he was, how he seemed to study everything, just like you. Theodore's throat tightened at these details of his son's birth, moments forever lost to him. The hardest part wasn't the sleepless nights or managing work with an infant, Eleanor continued. It was knowing that while I was building a life centered around this child, you were building empires without any awareness he existed. Your ignorance felt like the ultimate confirmation of how little our connection had meant to you. That's not fair, Theodore countered, defensive instincts rising. You made assumptions about what I would have wanted. You decided unilaterally that I had no place in his life. After 15 unanswered calls, after being told explicitly that you couldn't be disturbed for personal matters. Eleanor's voice remained controlled, but her eyes flashed. What conclusion would you have drawn? I would have persisted until I reached the person I needed, Theodore argued. That's what I've built my career on, persistence until breakthrough. That's the difference between us, Eleanor said quietly. I refuse to force myself where I'm not wanted. I won't teach my son to beg for attention or affection. If someone doesn't make space for you in their life, you don't squeeze yourself into the margins. The statement struck Theodore with unexpected force. Throughout his career, he'd prided himself on persistence, on forcing outcomes, compelling results, demanding success. Yet Eleanor had applied a different principle, dignity over desperation, self-respect over submission. I've missed 6 years, he said finally, the reality settling into his bones. 6 birthdays, first steps, first words, yes, no triumph in her acknowledgement, just fact. And that's on me, he admitted, his defenses crumbling. Not because you didn't try hard enough, but because I created a life where nothing could reach me except what I deemed important, and I deemed business important above all else. The admission cost him more than any financial loss ever had. For the first time, Theodore confronted the true price of his single-minded focus, not in dollars, but in irreplaceable moments with his son. What do you want now, Nate? Eleanor asked, the question deceptively simple. Why are you here? I want to know my son, he answered immediately. For how long? Her challenge was direct. Until the next big deal requires your full attention, until your board demands your focus, until being a father becomes inconvenient. That's not fair, isn't it? Eleanor countered. People reveal their priorities through consistent actions, not declarations in moments of emotion. For 6 years, your actions have shown exactly where your priorities lie. People change, Theodore insisted. Do they? Eleanor's question hung between them, genuine rather than rhetorical. Or do they simply become more authentically themselves over time? She rose, moving to a shelf where she extracted a folder. From it, she withdrew a magazine cover featuring Theodore's face beneath the headline, The Relentless Vision of Theodore Harrington. 3 months ago, she explained, placing it before him. The interview quotes you directly. Success requires sacrifice. I've eliminated distractions and focused solely on what advances my company's interests. Those words echo exactly what you told me in Barcelona. Theodore stared at his own image, confident, remote, powerful. A man defined by achievement rather than connection. The man in this article, Eleanor continued gently, would be a devastating father figure for Leo. He would teach our son that work matters more than relationships, that people are secondary to productivity, that emotions are inconvenient disruptions to success. Her words held no malice, only concern, not for herself, but for their child. Is that still who you are, Nate? Because Leo deserves better than half-hearted attention from someone who sees him as an obligation or a complication. The question hung between them, a challenge not just for their conversation, but for Theodore's entire future. Who was he truly? The driven CEO who eliminated distractions? Or could he become someone who valued connection above conquest? In the silence of Eleanor's modest kitchen, surrounded by evidence of the family life he'd never known, Theodore Harrington faced the most profound question of his existence. Could a man who built his identity on professional achievement transform into someone worthy of a child's trust and a mother's forgiveness? What would you do if you discovered you'd missed years of your child's life because of choices you made? Could you change your fundamental priorities? Or would you revert to comfortable patterns when challenges arose? The story of Theodore, Eleanor, and Leo challenges us to examine our own lives, our choices, our priorities, our capacity for transformation. If you're finding yourself reflecting on what truly matters in your own journey, join our community by subscribing now. In the next part of this extraordinary story, we'll discover whether Theodore can prove his commitment extends beyond words and whether Eleanor can trust again after years of raising their son alone. Hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss this powerful exploration of second chances and redemption. Effective immediately, I'm taking 2 weeks of personal leave. Silence engulfed the video conference as 7 executive faces registered identical shock. Theodore Harrington had never taken vacation, not when his parents died, not during market crashes, not even after surgery 2 years prior when he'd conducted meetings from his hospital bed. "I don't understand," said James Reynolds, his COO. "The Beijing delegation arrives Thursday. The quarterly board meeting is Monday. The London acquisition—" "We'll all proceed without me," Theodore interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "You're fully capable of handling these matters. This is ... unprecedented," offered Diane Mercer, his chief legal officer. "Is everything all right?" The concern in her voice was genuine. In 15 years, she'd never known Theodore to prioritize anything above Harrington Innovations. "Everything is fine," he assured them, though nothing felt fine. His world had been upended less than 24 hours ago. "Something personal requires my attention." Personal. The word felt foreign in his mouth. His entire adult life had been structured to eliminate the personal in favor of the professional. "Where will you be?" asked Reynolds, clearly struggling with this deviation from established patterns. "San Francisco." Theodore ended the call before further questions could emerge. Alone in his hotel suite, he stared at his phone. 63 notifications accumulated during the brief meeting. Market shifts, competitor movements, media inquiries. The constant pulse of commerce that had defined his existence. With deliberate movements, he silenced the device, then opened his messages to reread Eleanor's text. "If you're serious about getting to know Leo, we'll be at Golden Gate Park tomorrow. Botanical Gardens, 10 a.m. Take some time to think about what you really want, Nate. This isn't a business transaction you can optimize." He'd already replied with a single word: "I'll be there." Now the man who controlled markets worth billions confronted a challenge no financial resources could solve: how to connect with a child who didn't know. He was his father, and proved to that child's mother that he could change fundamental aspects of his character that had defined him for decades. The botanical garden teemed with weekend visitors. Theodore arrived 15 minutes early, having researched the venue and plotted optimal meeting locations, approaching this personal challenge with the same strategic mindset he applied to business. He spotted them near the succulent garden, Leo pointing excitedly at unusual plants while Eleanor knelt beside him, explaining something with animated gestures. The sight affected Theodore physically, a tightness in his chest, an unfamiliar catch in his throat. They looked complete without him, a family unit perfectly functional in his absence. Leo noticed him first. "Mr. Harrington," he called, waving with enthusiasm that made several visitors turn. "Hello, Leo," Theodore responded, approaching with careful steps, conscious of Eleanor's watchful gaze. "How are you today?" "Mom says you're staying in San Francisco for a while," Leo declared. "Are you building something here too?" "Not exactly," Theodore answered, glancing at Eleanor. "I'm taking some time off work. You?" Eleanor's surprise was evident. "Taking time off?" "People can change," he replied quietly. Her expression remained skeptical, but she turned to Leo. "Mr. Harrington is an old friend of mine. He'll be spending some time with us while he's in town. Can he come to the Science Museum too?" Leo asked. The simple acceptance of childhood making complex adult tensions seem unnecessary. "If he'd like to," Eleanor conceded. "I would," Theodore said immediately. "Very much." As they walked through the gardens, Theodore maintained a careful distance, close enough for conversation, far enough to respect boundaries. He answered Leo's rapid-fire questions about buildings, engineering, and whether he'd ever seen a real dinosaur fossil. "Actually, I have," Theodore revealed. "My company sponsored a museum exhibition last year. A whole dinosaur." Leo's eyes widened. "A Tyrannosaurus Rex skull," Theodore clarified. "They named it Harrington Rex." Leo laughed. the sound striking Theodore with unexpected force. Had anything in his career, any deal closed, any market conquered, ever produced such simple joy? "Mom, can we name our car Harrington Car?" Leo asked, dissolving into giggles at his own joke. Eleanor's lips twitched despite her reserve. "I think Mr. Harrington might have trademark concerns." "I'll waive the licensing fees," Theodore responded, earning another laugh from Leo and, briefly, a genuine smile from Eleanor. This tentative peace, he realized, was worth more than any contract he'd ever negotiated. Over the following days, Theodore eased into their lives with careful deliberation. Museum visits, a trip to the aquarium, lunch at Leo's favorite pizza place where the boy meticulously removed olives from his slice while explaining why sharks were misunderstood. "They don't want to eat people," Leo insisted. "They just get confused sometimes." "That makes sense," Theodore agreed. "Mistaken identity." "Exactly." Leo beamed at being understood. "Mom says we shouldn't judge someone without knowing their whole story." Theodore glanced at Eleanor, who was studying her water glass with sudden interest. Each interaction revealed new facets of his son. Leo's methodical approach to problem solving, his enthusiasm for scientific facts, his surprising empathy for others. Theodore recognized himself in some behaviors, but others were uniquely Leo's, or perhaps inherited from Eleanor. On the fourth day, during a visit to a code playground, Theodore experienced a first. Leo, climbing too high on a structure, slipped. Without conscious thought, Theodore lunged forward, catching him before he hit the ground. Leo's weight in his arms, solid, real, trusting, awakened something primitive and protective. For a breathless moment, Theodore held his son, confirming his safety. "Wow!" Leo exclaimed, unperturbed by his near fall. "You have really fast reflexes." "Are you okay?" Theodore asked, his heart racing more than when markets crashed. "I'm fine," Leo assured him, squirming to be put down. "Can we try the monkey bars next?" That evening in his hotel room, Theodore's phone displayed 14 missed calls from his office. The Beijing delegation had questions. The board sought his input. Market fluctuations required decisions. For the first time in his career, Theodore let the notifications accumulate without response. Instead, he found himself researching children's museums in San Francisco and the optimal age for learning chess. "He's asleep," Eleanor announced, joining Theodore on her small balcony after putting Leo to bed. 3 stories and 2 glasses of water later, 7 days into his vacation, Theodore had been invited to dinner at their apartment, a significant shift from their initial tense encounters. "He's extraordinary," Theodore said quietly. "Yes." Simple maternal pride in her voice. The evening air carried a slight chill. Eleanor wrapped her cardigan tighter, creating a physical barrier that matched the emotional one still between them. "Thank you," Theodore offered, "for allowing me into your lives." "Into his life." "Leo decides who he likes," Eleanor replied. "He's a good judge of character." "Better than his mother?" The question emerged gently, without accusation. Eleanor's laugh held complicated notes. His mother fell for a man who categorized relationships as distractions. His mother fell for a man who didn't know what mattered, Theodore corrected, who thought success could be measured in market share and acquisition values. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with history. "You seem different," Eleanor finally admitted. "This past week with Leo, you're not the man I remember." "I'm not," Theodore agreed. "Or perhaps I am, but I'm seeing through clearer eyes." "What changed?" The question seemed simple but carried layers of meaning. Theodore considered his answer carefully. "Meeting Leo made me realize I've been measuring success incorrectly my entire adult life. One week with a 6-year-old reformed, the ruthless CEO." Skepticism edged her voice. "Not reformed," Theodore clarified. "Awakened to possibilities I deliberately closed off, to connections I convinced myself were unnecessary." The truth felt raw, vulnerable, emotions he typically avoided. "I've built an empire that means nothing compared to one conversation with Leo about why octopuses have 3 hearts." Eleanor studied him, searching for authenticity or its absence. "People don't change their fundamental nature, Nate." "Perhaps not," he conceded, "but they can recognize when they've been living according to false values." As San Francisco lights glimmered below them, Eleanor didn't argue further, but something in her expression softened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of belief. On day 12 of his self-imposed leave, reality intruded. James Reynolds requested an emergency video conference that couldn't be delegated. The Korean investors are walking, Reynolds explained, his usual composure fractured. They're insisting on speaking directly with you. $60 million in funding hangs in the balance. Theodore sat in his hotel room, Leo's hand-drawn picture of their aquarium visit propped against his laptop. The boy had gifted it to him yesterday, carefully writing to Nate from Leo in uneven letters across the bottom. Schedule a call, Theodore instructed. Tomorrow morning. They're demanding now, Reynolds pressed. They're threatening to take the deal to Matthews Global by end of day. The old Theodore would have dropped everything immediately, would have considered it unquestionable priority. Billions in potential market valuation versus what? An afternoon at the Children's Science Museum where Leo had proudly planned to show him the electricity exhibit? They can wait until tomorrow, Theodore stated, his voice firm. Or they can go to Matthews. Our terms remain unchanged. Reynolds's shock transmitted clearly even through the digital connection. This isn't like you. No, Theodore agreed. It isn't. After ending the call, he stood at his hotel window, San Francisco spread before him. In one direction lay Harrington Tower West, 42 stories of architectural brilliance housing 300 employees advancing his corporate vision. In another direction, a modest apartment where Leo was waiting, excited to show him how static electricity could make his hair stand up. His phone buzzed with Reynolds's message. Koreans agreed to tomorrow, but board members are concerned about your extended absence. Questions about your commitment are circulating. The implicit threat was clear. The empire he'd built could be jeopardized if he continued prioritizing personal connections over corporate obligations. For 20 years, such a threat would have immediately realigned his focus. Now, Theodore found himself calculating different values. What price would he pay to hear Leo's laughter? What was the market value of Eleanor's grudging respect when he correctly answered Leo's science questions? What acquisition could possibly matter more than discovering who his son was becoming? As he prepared to meet Leo and Eleanor, Theodore recognized he stood at a crossroads, not between success and failure as he would have previously defined it, but between different versions of himself. The calculating CEO who measured worth in billions, or the man discovering that his greatest asset had never appeared on any balance sheet. His empire called for his return. His son waited to share discoveries. For the first time in his adult life, Theodore Harrington didn't know which path to choose. Mr. Harrington? Eleanor's voice broke through his sleep at 2:17 a.m., tense and frightened in a way he'd never heard before. It's Leo. He's burning up. We're heading to the emergency room. Theodore was already moving, phone cradled between shoulder and ear as he pulled on clothes. Which hospital? UCSF Medical Center. His breathing. Her voice caught. It's not good. I'm on my way. The taxi ride through San Francisco's empty streets felt endless. Theodore's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, his usual analytical processing hijacked by a new visceral fear he'd never experienced in business crises. When he arrived at pediatric emergency, he found Eleanor pacing the waiting area, her face pale with worry. What happened? He asked, the calm he maintained in boardrooms deserting him entirely. His temperature spiked suddenly. He was struggling to breathe. Eleanor's composure was cracking. They're examining him now. Without thinking, Theodore reached for her hand. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington? A doctor approached, clipboard in hand. Neither corrected the assumption. Leo has pneumonia, the doctor explained. The infection has progressed rapidly. We need to admit him immediately. Will he be okay? Theodore asked, the question stripped of his customary confidence. Children can deteriorate quickly with pneumonia, but they also respond well to treatment. The next 20 to 4 hours will be critical. As they followed the doctor through sterile corridors, Eleanor whispered, I've never seen him this sick. Theodore's response surprised even himself. We'll get through this together. His phone vibrated in his pocket, the Korean investors confirming their morning video call. For the first time in his career, Theodore Harrington didn't even check the message. Leo looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, oxygen tubes in his nose, monitors beeping steadily beside him. His normally energetic body lay still except for the rapid rise and fall of his chest. Theodore stood frozen in the doorway. In board meetings and negotiations, he commanded attention, controlled outcomes, directed events with absolute authority. Here, he was powerless. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, approaching the bed. Leo's eyes fluttered open, recognition dawning slowly. "Nate," he whispered, voice raspy. "Did you see? I'm in the hospital." "I see that," Theodore replied, forcing steadiness into his voice. "The doctors are going to help you feel better soon." "Will you stay?" Leo asked, the simple question carrying unexpected weight. "Yes," Theodore promised without hesitation. "I'll be right here." His phone vibrated again. Reynolds now, with mounting urgency about the Korean deal. The board meeting. The acquisition paperwork requiring his signature. "I need to make a quick call," he told Eleanor, stepping into the hallway. Reynolds answered immediately. "Where are you?" "The Koreans are waiting. The entire executive team is assembled." "I won't be joining," Theodore stated, his decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. "My son is in the hospital with pneumonia." Silence stretched across the connection. "Your son?" Reynolds finally responded. "Yes. Handle the Koreans, reschedule the board meeting. The acquisition paperwork can wait." "Theodore, with all due respect, $60 million in funding is irrelevant right now," Theodore interrupted. "Family emergency. I'll be unreachable for the foreseeable future." He ended the call before Reynolds could respond, turning his phone to silent before returning to Leo's room. Eleanor looked up from her position beside the bed, her expression questioning. "The Korean investors?" she asked quietly, remembering their earlier conversation about the pending deal. Hours blended into one another as monitors beeped, nurses came and went, and Leo drifted between restless sleep and brief wakefulness. His fever remained stubbornly high despite medication. His breathing labored despite supplemental oxygen. Theodore and Eleanor established an unspoken rotation, one always at Leo's bedside while the other stepped out briefly for coffee or to speak with doctors. Neither suggested leaving the hospital, even as one day stretched into two. During the second night, Eleanor finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep in the recliner beside Leo's bed. Theodore covered her with his suit jacket, then took the chair on Leo's other side. "Your mom needs rest," he explained softly when Leo stirred. "But I'm awake if you need anything." "Will you tell me a story?" Leo asked, his voice weak, but his eyes more alert than they'd been all day. Theodore, who had never read children's stories, found himself improvising. "Once there was a man who built towers of glass and steel," he began. He thought these towers made him important. But one day, he met a boy who could build amazing things with just his imagination, and the man realized he had been measuring importance all wrong. Leo listened intently, occasionally asking questions despite his fatigue. Eventually, his eyelids grew heavy. "Stay," Leo murmured as he drifted toward sleep, his small hand reaching for Theodore's. "Always," Theodore promised, the single word redefining his future. Across the bed, he realized Eleanor was awake, watching this exchange with an expression he couldn't fully interpret, part wonder, part wariness, perhaps a trace of hope. "You didn't have to stay," she said quietly. "I know what this is costing your business." "Nothing of value," Theodore replied with certainty. "Nothing that matters." Morning brought cautious optimism from the medical team. Leo's fever had finally broken. His oxygen levels were improving. The antibiotics were working. "He's responding well," the doctor confirmed. "Children can bounce back quickly once we get ahead of the infection." As relief washed over them, Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Silent tears tracked down her face, the release of fear she'd been containing for Leo's sake. Without thinking, Theodore pulled her into his arms. To his surprise, she didn't resist, instead leaning into him momentarily before straightening. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being here. For him." The gratitude felt undeserved. "Where else would I be?" he asked, the question entirely rhetorical. On the third day, with Leo showing steady improvement, Theodore stepped into the hospital corridor to face the business crisis his absence had created. 16 voicemails, 43 urgent emails, 3 emergency board requests. He dialed his chief operating officer first. "The board is calling for an emergency session," Reynolds began without preamble. "Your absence during critical negotiations has raised questions about your commitment." "Schedule the session," Theodore replied calmly. "Video conference. Tomorrow. They're expecting you in person. Today. My son is still hospitalized. I'll join remotely tomorrow or they can proceed without me." "Theodore," Reynolds' voice lowered. "They're discussing a confidence vote. This isn't just about the Korean deal anymore. Your behavior these past weeks has been Unprecedented. Yes, Theodore agreed. It has been. After ending the call, he contacted his attorney, outlining specific changes he wanted prepared before tomorrow's meeting. The instructions were clear, detailed, and revolutionary for Harrington Innovations. When he returned to Leo's room, the boy was sitting up, color returning to his face as he worked on a puzzle book a nurse had brought him. "Look," Leo exclaimed. "I finished the hard maze." The pride in his son's voice over this small accomplishment struck Theodore as infinitely more valuable than any corporate milestone he'd ever celebrated. Eleanor watched them interact, her initial wariness gradually softening. "The doctor says Leo might be discharged tomorrow if his improvement continues." "That's excellent news," Theodore replied, though his expression remained thoughtful. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, reading his concern. "I have a board meeting tomorrow, by video. They're questioning my leadership priorities." "Because you've been here instead of there," Eleanor concluded. "Not a question. Yes. And what will you tell them?" Theodore met her gaze directly. "The truth. That my priorities have fundamentally changed. That Harrington Innovations will need to adapt to that reality." The following morning, Theodore sat in a private consultation room at the hospital, laptop open as 12 board members appeared on his screen. Their expressions ranged from concern to outright displeasure. "Before we begin," Theodore stated, "I've instructed legal to distribute an updated corporate structure proposal. You should be receiving it now." Confusion spread across the virtual meeting as documents were opened and reviewed. "This is extraordinary," said Victoria Winters, the longest-serving board member. "You're proposing to step down as CEO and transition to executive chairman?" "Yes," Theodore confirmed, "with James Reynolds assuming CEO responsibilities for day-to-day operations." "May I ask what precipitated this radical restructuring?" asked another board member. Theodore's response was measured but firm. "Recent events have clarified my priorities. I have a 6-year-old son I'm just getting to know. I won't sacrifice that relationship for corporate obligations, nor will I serve Harrington Innovations effectively if I'm dividing my attention." Stunned silence followed this personal revelation from a man who had always kept his private life entirely separate from business. "The proposed structure leverages our existing leadership team while allowing me to maintain strategic oversight," Theodore continued. "The quarterly targets remain unchanged. The 5-year expansion plan proceeds as outlined." Victoria Winters leaned forward. "And if we don't approve this restructuring, then I resign completely," Theodore stated without hesitation. "My decision isn't negotiable." When the meeting concluded 90 minutes later, Harrington Innovations had a new CEO, a modified leadership structure, and an executive chairman who had demonstrated that some principles weren't subject to compromise. Theodore closed his laptop to find Eleanor standing in the doorway. "I heard," she said quietly. "Reynolds is CEO?" "He's been ready for years," Theodore confirmed. "I just wasn't ready to let go, and now I understand there are more important things to hold on to." He held her gaze, letting the words settle between them. "The restructuring changes nothing about my financial position, but everything about my availability." "I'm not asking for immediate answers, Eleanor. I'm showing you what matters to me now." As they walked back to Leo's room, where a doctor was preparing discharge papers, Eleanor didn't make promises or declarations. But when her hand briefly brushed against his, she didn't pull away, the smallest gesture carrying the weight of possibility. "How do we tell him?" Theodore asked, pacing Eleanor's living room 2 weeks after Leo's recovery. "What's the right approach?" They'd been working with a family therapist, preparing for this moment. Leo had fully recovered from pneumonia, and Theodore had successfully transitioned to his new role as executive chairman, creating space in his life that had never existed before. Dr. Winters suggested keeping it simple, Eleanor replied. "Children process big information better when it's delivered straightforwardly." Theodore nodded, uncharacteristically nervous. In business, he delivered world-changing announcements with perfect composure. This conversation with a 6-year-old terrified him more than any market crash. "What if he hates me for being absent?" The question emerged vulnerable, stripped of his usual confidence. Eleanor's expression softened. "Leo doesn't hate anyone. It's not in his nature." They'd chosen a Saturday morning for the conversation. No work obligations, no school, a full day for Leo to process and ask questions. Eleanor had prepared his favorite breakfast, creating a comfortable environment for life-changing news. When Leo bounded into the kitchen, hair still tousled from sleep, he noticed the unusual tension immediately. Why are you both looking at me like that? Did I do something wrong? No, not at all, Eleanor assured him, helping him into his chair. We just have something important to talk about. Leo looked between them, suddenly serious. Is it about why Nate comes over all the time now? Eleanor exchanged glances with Theodore, who took a careful seat across from his son. Leo, Eleanor began gently, remember how you've asked about your dad sometimes, about who he is and where he lives. Leo nodded, attention focused on his mother. The truth is, she continued, Nate is your father. The words hung in the air, simple, direct, life-changing. Leo's gaze shifted to Theodore, studying him with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. You're my dad? Yes, Theodore confirmed, voice steady despite his racing heart. I am. Leo's reaction defied all their careful preparations and worried anticipation. I knew it, he exclaimed, surprising both adults. You have the same thinking wrinkle right here. He pointed between his eyebrows, demonstrating the expression. Eleanor looked stunned. You knew? Not knew, Leo clarified in the logical way of children. But I wondered. Tommy at school has a dad who doesn't live with them, and he comes for visits like Nate does. And Ms. Garcia said sometimes kids look like their parents, and I look like Nate when I concentrate. Theodore felt emotion constricting his throat. You're not upset? Why would I be upset? Leo asked genuinely. Is this why you've been visiting us? Because you found out I'm your son? The directness of the question momentarily halted Theodore. How to explain the complex circumstances to a child without burdening him with adult complexities? I didn't know about you until we met on the airplane, Theodore admitted, choosing honesty. After your mother and I stopped seeing each other, we lost contact. I didn't know she was going to have you. So you did not want me? Leo asked, the double negative revealing his primary concern. No, Theodore said firmly, moving to kneel beside Leo's chair. I didn't know about you. If I had known, I would have wanted to be part of your life from the beginning. Leo considered this with remarkable composure. But now you know, and you want to be my dad? More than anything in the world, Theodore confirmed. Leo turned to his mother. Are you and Dad getting married now? The innocent question caught both adults off guard. Eleanor recovered first. That's not something we've decided yet, Leo. Right now, we're focused on you getting to know your father. Okay, Leo accepted easily. Can I still call you Nate, or do I have to say Dad? You can call me whatever feels right to you, Theodore replied, overwhelmed by his son's simple acceptance. Leo nodded thoughtfully, then returned to his pancakes with the remarkable adaptability of childhood. These are really good, Mom. Over Leo's head, Eleanor and Theodore exchanged glances of wonder and relief. The moment they'd approached with such trepidation had passed with unexpected grace. The weeks that followed brought adjustments both practical and emotional. Theodore purchased a home in San Francisco, not ostentatiously large but comfortable, with a bedroom designed specifically for Leo and a home office for Eleanor to work on her architectural projects. Their new arrangement evolved organically. Leo divided time between both homes, gradually growing comfortable with overnight stays at Theodore's place. Eleanor and Theodore navigated Keo parenting with careful communication, weekly planning sessions, and occasional disagreements about everything from bedtimes to educational philosophies. He needs consistent sleep schedules, Eleanor argued during one such discussion. One late night watching the meteor shower won't disrupt his development, Theodore countered, still learning the balance between indulgence and structure. These minor conflicts revealed their different approaches. Eleanor's nurturing consistency versus Theodore's desire to provide experiences and opportunities. Yet both prioritized Leo's well-being above their own preferences. More complex were the emotional adjustments. Leo tested boundaries, occasionally playing his parents against each other or withdrawing when overwhelmed by the changes. During one difficult evening, Leo refused to leave Eleanor's apartment for his scheduled night at Theodore's. I want to stay with Mom, he insisted, uncharacteristically defiant. We agreed you'd stay with me tonight, Theodore reminded him, trying to mask his hurt. I don't care. You can't make me go, Leo shouted, running to his room. Later, after Leo had calmed, he approached Theodore with solemn eyes. I'm sorry, I yelled. I was scared. Scared of what? Theodore asked gently. That if I went with you, Mom would be lonely, or that she might disappear too. The comment revealed Leo's deeper fears, that the stability he'd known might vanish as quickly as his father had appeared. That night, rather than following the schedule, they ordered pizza at Eleanor's apartment, all three together. As Leo fell asleep between them on the couch, Eleanor whispered, "Sometimes the plan needs to change." "I'm learning that," Theodore admitted, watching his sleeping son with wonder. Every day, 6 months into their new family configuration, Theodore approached Eleanor with an unexpected proposal. "I'd like to take you and Leo to Barcelona," he suggested, to show him where it all began. The city held complicated memories, their beginning and their ending, yet remained significant in their shared history. Barcelona greeted them with Mediterranean sunshine and familiar streets that carried echoes of their past relationship. They showed Leo the architectural wonders that had brought his parents together, the plaza where they'd shared their first kiss, the cafe where they'd spent hours discussing design philosophies. On their third evening, while Leo explored tide pools with a hotel-arranged childcare specialist, Theodore led Eleanor to a familiar balcony overlooking the Gothic Quarter, the same spot where they'd once imagined a future together. "This is where I made the biggest mistake of my life," Theodore said quietly. "Which was?" Eleanor asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Believing anything mattered more than this, than us." He turned to face her fully. "I've spent 6 months showing you who I am now, hoping my actions speak louder than any promises could." From his pocket, he withdrew not a ring box, but a small architectural model, a miniature of the three of them, crafted with precise detail, standing together. "I'm not asking you to forgive the past," he continued. "I'm asking if you'll consider building a future, the three of us, together." Eleanor studied the model, emotion playing across her features. "You've changed," she acknowledged. "But have I? I'm not the same woman you knew in Barcelona either." "I'm counting on that," Theodore replied. "I fell in love with who you were then. I've fallen in love with who you are now, stronger, wiser, an amazing mother. And if I say yes, what happens to my career, my independence?" "They remain essential parts of who you are," he assured her. "I'm not asking you to diminish yourself. I'm asking if we might be stronger together." Under the same stars that had witnessed their parting years before, Eleanor gave him her answer. Their wedding, held 6 months later, centered not on extravagance but on meaning. The ceremony took place in a garden overlooking San Francisco Bay, with just 60 guests, a stark contrast to the corporate galas Theodore once headlined. Leo, dressed in a suit that matched his father's, served as best man, ring bearer, and official family representative, a title he'd created himself. When the moment came for vows, Theodore surprised everyone by kneeling to address Leo first. "Before I make promises to your mother," he said, "I want to make promises to you. I will be present, not just physically, but fully, with my attention and my heart. I will listen to your ideas, support your dreams, and love you unconditionally. I might make mistakes, but I will never stop trying to be the father you deserve." Leo, solemn with the importance of the moment, responded with his own prepared statement. "I promise to teach you important stuff about dinosaurs and planets, and to tell you when you're being too serious, and to love you even when you have to work sometimes." The gathered guests laughed softly at the child's straightforward wisdom. When Eleanor and Theodore exchanged their vows afterward, they spoke not only of love but of growth, of second chances embraced, a family built through choice rather than obligation. "You once asked if people truly change," Theodore recalled in his vows. "I believe now that real change isn't becoming someone new, but becoming more authentically who you were always meant to be." As they moved through the reception, the three of them together, Theodore reflected on how differently his life might have unfolded if his private jet hadn't experienced mechanical issues that fateful day, if he hadn't been seated across from a crying child who turned out to be his son. Sometimes life's most precious gifts arrive through what appears to be inconvenience, disruption, or even failure. For in gaining a son, Theodore Harrington had discovered the man he was meant to be, not the titan of industry celebrated in business journals, but simply a father and husband whose true legacy would be measured in love rather than acquisitions. On Leo's 8th birthday, the celebration unfolded at their San Francisco home, a gathering modest in size but rich in meaning. Classmates battled in scavenger hunts throughout the garden. Parents mingled over coffee, watching their children's excitement. Eleanor orchestrated activities with the same precision she applied to architectural projects. Through it all, Theodore observed with quiet wonder. 1 year had passed since that fateful flight, a single year that had completely reoriented his understanding of what mattered. When the cake had been devoured and guests had departed, the family settled in their living room for their private gift-giving tradition. Eleanor presented Leo with a telescope he'd coveted for months. For exploring the universe, she explained as he unwrapped it with reverent hands. "My turn," Theodore announced, handing Leo a package wrapped in blue paper. Leo unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal, his name embossed in gold on the cover. "A book? Open it," Theodore encouraged. Leo flipped open the cover to find his father's handwriting filling the first page. "To my son, the day I met you was the luckiest day of my life, even though I didn't know it yet. Before you, I thought success was measured by what you achieve. Now I know it's measured by whom you love and how well you love them. May you always know your worth isn't in what you accomplish, but in who you are. And you, Leo Harrington Valencia, are extraordinary, not because of anything you'll build or earn, but simply because you exist. All my love, Dad." Leo looked up, his expression solemn with understanding beyond his years. "Is this for writing my thoughts? And dreams, ideas, questions, anything you want to remember," Theodore explained. "I wish I'd recorded more memories when I was your age." Leo traced his fingers over the embossed letters of his name. "Thank you, Dad." The word still created a catch in Theodore's throat every time Leo used it, a title more valuable than any corporate designation he'd ever held. Later that night, after Leo had fallen asleep surrounded by birthday gifts, Theodore and Eleanor sat on their deck overlooking the city lights. "He loved the journal," Eleanor observed, handing Theodore a glass of wine. "I hope someday he understands what I was trying to say," Theodore replied. "About value and worth being separate from achievement, says the man who built a multi-billion-dollar company," Eleanor teased gently. "A company that almost cost me everything that matters," Theodore countered. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out if your private jet hadn't had mechanical issues that day?" Eleanor considered. "You would have flown to Seoul without incident. We would have remained strangers passing through the same cities. Leo would have grown up without knowing me, and you might never have questioned your definition of success." The thought settled heavily between them, how close they'd come to missing this life together. How a mechanical failure had actually been the mechanism for profound connection. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd checked my messages more carefully after Barcelona," Theodore admitted. "If I'd known about your pregnancy from the beginning," Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. "I used to imagine that too, but I'm not sure the man you were then was ready to be the father Leo needed." "You're probably right," Theodore acknowledged. "I needed to recognize what I was missing before I could value it properly." Their conversation drifted into comfortable silence as they contemplated the strange geometry of life, how paths diverge and converge, how single moments can alter trajectories entirely. "When I left Barcelona," Theodore said finally, "I thought I was choosing the more valuable path, the one with measurable returns. And now? Now I understand that nothing I built was worth what I nearly lost." The following morning, Theodore entered his home office to find Leo already there, writing in his new journal with intense concentration. "What are you working on?" Theodore asked, careful not to interrupt his son's focus. "I'm making a list of the most important things," Leo explained. "Like you taught me." Theodore peered over his shoulder to see a child's handwriting listing. "Mom, Dad, Grandma Vivian, my rocks, learning about space, drawing buildings with Mom." Material possessions, even the birthday telescope, appeared far down the list, overshadowed by relationships and experiences. "That's an excellent priority list," Theodore observed. "What's on your list?" Leo asked. "Is it your company?" The question, innocent yet profound, made Theodore smile. "Not anymore." "My list starts with you and your mom." Leo considered this with serious nods. "Because we're your family. Because you're what makes everything else meaningful," Theodore corrected gently. For most of his adult life, Theodore had measured his worth through stock valuations, market share, and acquisition strategies. His calendar had been filled with meetings, his mind occupied with competitive positioning, his energy directed toward expansion. None of those pursuits had provided what he now experienced daily, the satisfaction of helping with homework, the joy of weekend expeditions to tide pools, the simple pleasure of family dinners where Leo's enthusiastic stories took precedence over quarterly reports. The metrics that once drove him, growth percentages, profit margins, competitive rankings, now seemed hollow compared to different measurements. Leo's confidence growing under his guidance, Eleanor's trust rebuilt through consistent presence, their family unit strengthening through shared experiences. True wealth, Theodore had discovered, couldn't be calculated on balance sheets or annual reports. It existed in moments of connection, in relationships that demanded presence rather than productivity, in love freely given without expected return. As their family story continued to unfold, the lessons of that chance encounter remained central to their journey together. Life brought new challenges, Eleanor's international commissions requiring temporary separations, Theodore's strategic guidance still occasionally demanding travel, Leo's growing independence presenting new parenting questions. Yet through each evolution, they maintained what mattered most, the understanding that relationships required investment more valuable than financial capital, the currencies of time, attention, and genuine presence. For Theodore Harrington, once celebrated for building physical monuments of glass and steel, his most meaningful construction had become this family, not perfect, sometimes messy, but built with intentional care and conscious choice. The man who had once measured success in billions now found his richest moments in his son's laughter, his wife's creativity, their shared future unfolding with possibilities no strategic plan could have anticipated. As Leo grew, the story of how his parents reconnected became family legend, how a billionaire CEO helped a crying child on a plane, only to discover his greatest treasure had been missing from his life all along. What defines true success? Is it the empire you build, the wealth you accumulate, the achievements you list on a resume? Or might it be something more fundamental, the lives you touch, the love you share, the presence you offer when it matters most? If this story resonated with you, consider what treasures might be waiting in your own life, connections you've overlooked, relationships you've deprioritized, joy you've postponed in pursuit of conventional success. Subscribe now to continue exploring these profound questions through stories that challenge our assumptions and remind us of essential truths. Because sometimes the most important journeys aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that interrupt our carefully structured lives with the gift of unexpected love.